Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to My First Business, the podcast. I'm your host, named Parvez, and I'm a relatively new and sometimes clueless business owner. And I wanted to talk to seasoned entrepreneurs to help guide me and inspire me and help me understand the best way to grow my own business. So what mistakes to avoid, how to overcome common challenges, how to identify opportunities, and that's why I created the show for you, dear listener. So if you're new to business or old, I don't care, I'm not an ageist. I bring on guests from all sorts of industries and they are full of wisdom that you'll chew right up. And each episode is going to be like a conversation with a mentor that you never had. My guest today is James Pardoe. James's story starts when he was a teenager. At 17, he taught himself how to code, build a website, learned the principles of design, marketed his website, and started to monetize it. While his friends were at university and yet to experience the real world, James had managed to teach himself how to run a business from his bedroom. And somewhere in between, he also sold stick insects and built a computer game. Founded in the basement in 2012 and now spanning 3 continents, James is the CEO and co-founder of Grow, a growth consultancy firm with an impressive client roster, including Google, Four Seasons, Casio DP World, and WeWork. Today, James lives in Sri Lanka with his wife and 3 kids, focused on creating his dream lifestyle. In this episode of My First Business, James and I discuss the realities of entrepreneurship no one tells you, how to make your business work for you and your lifestyle, the importance of emotional detachment from your business, costly startup mistakes to avoid, the opportunity cost of keeping and selling your business, developing a mindset for the long run, cultivating a culture of growth and happiness, the intersection of mental health and business, and leveraging agency masterminds and mentorship. James is a goddamn sweetheart and he's a capitalist with a conscience. And like me, he also runs his business with a spouse, so we had a lot to talk about. So without further ado, enjoy my very inspiring conversation with James. Well, James, thanks for coming to My First Business podcast. Glad to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
I thought I'd start off in a very, very random place. It has nothing to do with the rest of our conversation, but I like to do this at the start just to throw you off. Is it true, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is it true that you may or may not want to live forever?
That is true, yeah. Is this a question you ask everyone or just me because you've been stalking me?
I've been stalking you. It's a very personalized question. Why do you want to live forever?
Well, partly because I'm not religious, and so I think this is all there is, and partly because, like, you get it right, and life is amazing, and why would you want to kind of, end it? No one actually wants to die, so why not kind of extend it as far as you possibly can? And the other thing is that I feel like in my life, I want to have multiple lives. I want to, be a business owner. I want to be an employee. I want to be a rocket engineer, whatever it is. I'd like to try lots of different things and live different lives. And in one lifespan, I don't think that's enough time to do that.
That's a very interesting take. I've been hearing about obviously life extension and all the technologies and the thinking that's going behind it. I personally never fully understood the concept of wanting that. I guess when you put it that way, because I am sort of like I wouldn't call myself a polymath, but I want to be polymath in the sense that I like to get interested in a lot of things, maybe not to the down below depths of it, but I do like to experiment. And you're right, if you just have one life and you're not expecting anything after death, it's just a blank slate or a dark reset, and you have no control over that, then why not? Okay, I'm sold. You were able to sell me in like 30 seconds. But okay. Speaking of life and future, but let's go back a bit. We're gonna jump a few levels backwards from the ultimate infinite life to where you are right now. So for the sake of the guests, or for the sake of the listeners here, how would you describe yourself now? Who are you in life right now, in your business and personal life? How would you, when you meet people at a party and they ask you, hey, who are you? What do you do? How would you respond to that?
Okay. So I'm James. I'm the CEO of Grow and co-founder. And I mean, this is the boring part, really. This is just, this is what I do. It's not kind of
It's not who
what I
you are.
believe, but essentially,
Yeah.
I guess I could add. Well, I'll explain Grow first. Okay, so Grow is a growth agency where we have a model called the Growth Trifecta, which basically, in short, means that we look at the whole ecosystem of growth, which is marketing, sales, and retention. Make sure all of those three areas are firing on all cylinders to create not just fly by night growth, but sustainable growth. But me as a person, I'm ambitious and I'm also very lazy. So I work so that I don't have to work, which means that, I mean, it's kind of why I've created a business instead of just doing this myself. It's because I can delegate it. But the other reason I created the business was for improved lifestyle. And so I'm a big believer that, the business should work for me rather than vice versa. And so I try my best to lead a good life. And as such, I'm living in Sri Lanka at the moment. And that was off the back of traveling the world to try and see where we want to settle and just to experience new cultures and just make the most of what we have.
So yeah, in terms of growth or grow, how would you describe it in numbers? How long has it been around? How many people are working on it? What numbers come to mind if you were to describe your current venture, Grow?
So we're just coming up on our 10th anniversary. We're a team of how many is the last count? I think we're about 6 at the moment of core team, which is actually particularly low off the back of COVID, but also intentionally because with COVID we were kind of forced to rethink things. Obviously revenue fell, and so we had to kind of recalibrate. But also in doing so, we focused on keeping the core team that were just the superstars, and getting rid of the dead weight. And as a result, although revenue is down, we're actually more profitable than we've ever been. So we're in a really good position now where we're entering, obviously in during COVID as well, we focused on our branding and our sales proposition and all of the materials that go around behind that. And so, that's all sorted now. So we're ready to kind of smash it in 2022 and get back to some of the peak times. I mean, peak, we had 16 employees, but maybe you'll want to ask me about that later, because that was actually a mistake. But right now, we're lean and mean, and we've got a nice network of freelancers and partners as well. So we started to outsource a lot of the work to one or the other, because it's enabling us to specialize in what we do really well, and then give business to the others who specialize in something else that we're not so good at.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm gonna check in on that particular note, and I'm also not gonna forget the ambitious yet lazy and delegation and the whole philosophy behind how you think of business. But I do want to take another backwards jump before we get there. I promise you we'll go there. That will be majority of our conversation, I think. But let's go back to your childhood. Like your physiotherapist, I'd like to explore a bit of that. If you want to describe who you were growing up, or in hindsight, who do you think you were growing up? What was your surroundings like, the city you were in, and who were your influences at the point? Who were you kind of subconsciously looking up to or trying to model? And based on that, it's a pretty loaded question, and I'm leaving it broad for a very good reason. And also lastly, like, how were you spending time as a young one? Before the age of 18, where did you spend the most amount of time?
Okay, so I've always been an entrepreneur. My first business was breeding and selling stick insects. And my mum used to go to car boot sales in the UK, and she was selling clothes. And I would just set up shop next to her with my terrariums full of stick insects and flog them. I think, my mentors and the people I looked up to back then was first of all my grandfather, because he ran a business in the UK. It was never massive. It was always very modest, and it was more actually, he kind of kept it going for the sake of the employees, which gave me a kind of understanding of the ethical aspect of leadership and that kind of thing, the moral aspect. So he was a big influence in terms of, making me believe that I could be a business owner rather than just an employee, which I feel like people are taught in school. And then a little bit later in my life, my father, after working for about 20 years in his company, he acquired a share in it. And basically the quality of life and his affluence just transformed pretty much overnight. So that was a big kind of motivator and driving force to kind of reconfirm to me that this is the right path. As a child, I was sick a lot. I missed a lot of school. And so where I spent my time was on the PC. And in hindsight, that was a good thing, because whilst I kind of fell down on the social side, all of the stuff that I would have learned in school, I kind of taught myself. And I just spent a lot of time learning how to do stuff. So there was one time when I was reading an article on a set of speakers, because I was into computer gaming at the time. So this really high-end speaker system. And the guy in the editorial just mentioned that he'd been given it for free. And that kind of piqued my interest, being I was probably 17 at the time, and obviously dependent on my parents' pocket money, of which I was adamant that I wasn't being given enough. And so I looked at ways to change that. And so I kind of delved deeper, and long story short, I ended up creating my own review website, where I'd review computer hardware, and then the manufacturers would send me the hardware free of charge, and then I'd write a review on it. I could keep it. But in order to do that, I had to learn how to code. I had to learn how to design. I also then started recruiting writers as well, and kind of encouraging them to do it for free as well, because I was just a kid and didn't have the funds to do that, to employ them. And so I guess a certain element of leadership was involved. And that kind of grew into quite a large thing in terms of, at its peak, we had 20,000 visitors per day to the website. And I finally added Google AdSense to the website. So I started generating revenue from the ads on it. And so, yeah, it was just a great way to kind of get an all-round experience at a very young age, of what it is to run a business and lead a team. And then I came to that age where all my friends, so this was back in Dubai, so all my friends were leaving Dubai to go to university, and I was hearing what great how great life was as a student. So I kind of got FOMO, and so I was stuck in my parents' house on the computer in Dubai, and all my friends were off, getting drunk, and so I kind of looked at ways that I could change that. And it kind of just fell in my lap. It was one of the writers from my website had a vacancy in the company he was working at. And it was kind of a combination of development and marketing and graphic design, and just kind of doing everything for them. And so I got a part-time job there. And so moved over to the UK, stayed with the same guy. He put me up for a year, bless him. I was not easy to live with. And just because I had no social experience, or I was completely clueless anyway. But yeah, he kind of gave me that platform to get some job experience, but at the same time I made friends with the interns and had the uni lifestyle instead of going to university. So I guess that's probably 5 or 6 years worth of experience in business in general, before any of my friends just left university. And I didn't have the debt or anything like that. So yeah, that led me into just freelancing as a web developer and designer. There was also a stint where I started to develop my game, a computer game, which was a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. So it was incredibly ambitious mistake, but at the same time, I look back and it was one of the most passionate times of my life, where you basically combine the logic of programming, and this is hardcore programming, where I had to optimize this was a Flash game, so I had to optimize for poor performance to make sure the game ran effectively. I had to learn Java to program the back end server side. And I was also going back to school mathematics and learning how like planets would orbit around each other and the mathematics behind that, and crazy stuff like that. But it just, and also creating the story and creating the world was just pure creation, was just the most amazing experience. And I illustrated and animated all of the characters as well. So all of that combined was just pure ecstasy for me. And I would wake up in the morning thinking about code. There was one time when I did lucid dreaming and actually solved a coding problem that had been troubling me for 2 weeks, and I solved it. And then I went straight downstairs and applied it, and actually worked. To this day, I can't replicate that.
Wait,
But I was just
was that
sorry.
intentional lucid dreaming, or did you plan to lucid dream, or it just happened?
No, it was, I would just kind of woke up in this kind of semi-awake, semi-sleep state, thinking about code, which I did do quite a lot. But this time, for whatever reason, I could see all of the lines of code, and I was changing it and tweaking it and running it and debugging it. I know this sounds ridiculous, but the only reason I can say it to you and justify it is because actually the solution that I came up with worked. But just an example of how passionate I was at the time. And I slowly realized that it was a bigger undertaking, like more ambitious undertaking than I could do on my own unless I wanted to dedicate 10 years or 20 years to do it. And so I ended up engaging with a team in Dubai. I was really surprised to find them, but they were basically a game development team, 3 guys, one animator, one illustrator, and one developer. And so I used the money that I'd earned from the ads on the review website to fund it. But that was also kind of a mistake because I basically blew through all of the money and ended up with, we didn't even have a kind of a working demo. It was just, it was, I didn't plan. I had no business plan or anything. I was just running as I went and figuring it out and enjoying it. And I don't regret it because it was a great time in my life, and it taught me the kind of principles I needed to create grow. And it's kind of a dream to get back to that eventually. So yeah, and then I guess the other area was, so when I was working, I guess I need to step back a bit actually. Before the game development, I was working for the company in the UK, and then they basically let me work remotely, which is pretty forward thinking to think back in the day. And so I ended up working in Dubai for them and building it was only part-time, so I was building up my freelancing work as well. Until the point where the freelancing work was making more money than the job. So I resigned from the job and built that up. And then this kind of leads into how Grow was formed, was that I partnered up with my girlfriend at the time, now wife. She was doing marketing for the Camel Company, Cars Australia, 2 companies, retail companies in Dubai. And she engaged me to do the website. So we worked together on the website and the marketing together. And it went well. We actually won an award for the Camel Company website, and off the back of that, a few weeks later, we founded Grow because we realized that we were onto a winner.
Can I interject
Grow started
there?
out just.
Can I interject
Sorry?
there? I just think.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just interjecting there, but I think that's like the way you're mentioning all of these things that somehow seem all random events that happened over the course of such a long period, let's say 10 years. Are you connecting the dots as you're speaking to me now? Have you thought about how every kind of mistake led you to the next opportunity? Did you know at the moment what the build-up was, or were you kind of going with the flow and you just had the attitude of experimentation and trying the next thing? And what I'm hearing is, tell me this is right or wrong, but you were using everything as an opportunity to learn something else. Would that be fair to say?
I didn't see it like that. At that time I hadn't, read all of the books and learned about, the benefits of failing and all that. I'm just looking at it back in a positive light, I think. Back then I was just going with the flow. I was still very much keen on traveling, and so me and my wife would basically just use Dubai as a platform, and we'd make money and then go and spend it and travel wherever we could. And so I was just enjoying life. I always had a vision, though. I always had an ambition to create, grow. Essentially, it was going to be a marketing agency or a digital agency of some sort. I always had a vision to have a team and be successful in that regard. So the freelancing, it was quite obvious to me what the next step would be. The other areas, the game development, was through passion, pure passion. I was passionate about games and I was passionate about development by that point. I can't remember where the graphic design and illustration came from, but it would just combined everything. And the only reason that stopped was just because I ran out of money, and I needed to get serious. So yeah, it's kind of a mixture of just kind of fumbling through, just living my life. I guess what kept me on course was the necessity to win more business as a freelancer. So that's probably why I've naturally ended up where I am, because after so one other thing is, I guess my first client was my father's business, or the company my father used to work with. I think that was actually before I worked for the company in the UK. So that was kind of my stepping stone of amalgamation of my skills from the review site. And then I started getting more freelance work around it. And I think that's actually also what I used to get the job in the UK. And then coming back from the UK, the freelancing just kind of exploded. It got bigger and bigger. And then, that's when that kind of just through good timing, I suppose. We just decided it was the right time to take it seriously, but, form a company. That was, all up until then, I was living with my parents as well. And my wife was as well, who was sharing. And we were in the basement. It's the typical startup story, right? We had a basement in the house where we would work, and there was no phone signal. So we had to put the phones on the shelf of the window to try and get as much signal as we could. And it was smelt of damp, it was moldy, and the typical thing. So it was when we started to grow that we took it to the next level. We got our own place and moved out, and that's when the traveling stopped, because all of our money went into the business. But then we had a new adventure, a different type of adventure.
Let me explore the start of Grow a bit more. So just for context, right? Similar case, my wife and I run a business together, but in our case, it was a very much accidental business, right? Alina was freelancing, just kind of like yourself, getting the first few clients out of your network, which is friends and family, and people you just met at a party that realized that you could do. And she wasn't technically very, very good at the beginning, but after the first few stints of working with friends, she found out she had a great knack for advertising on Facebook. And things grew to a point where she woke up one day and she realized, oh, damn, I have a business. And maybe I should get a trade license. I'm like, she was making about 50K dirhams at the point, any given month. And it was just purely accidental. And COVID hit, and I was employed at the time, working on another job, and I looked at the numbers. I looked at our service model. We used to discuss it anyway, over evenings, over dinner, and on the weekends anyway. And it just made sense. Okay, experiment one was going 0 to 1, so freelancer to business, and then I go on as I come on as the 1 to 10 guy, or seemingly we're still in the process of 1 to 10. But I'm curious about you guys. How much of it was accidental versus very, very super intentional? Did you guys get to what was that point where you said, okay, let's make this a proper business? What were the considerations? And maybe you can tie in some of the philosophy that you mentioned earlier, about team building, having something bigger than yourself, having a strong focus on lifestyle, using Dubai as a base to, use that as the hub. How much of that played into just the genesis part of it? What were the conversations like? It's a very, again, loaded question, but I want to leave it open-ended just to see what comes out.
it's hard thinking back that far. But it was, I can't remember why did we, I think it was a combination of things. So Laura was getting a little bit disgruntled in her job, feeling like she wasn't being paid enough and she was working late nights. And so it wasn't great. And at the same time, my freelance work was getting to the point where I was full on, and we needed to either hire somebody or do something in that regard. And I think then the combination of us working together and seeing that opportunity, and also it turned into an opportunity where Laura actually left her company, and that company then became one of our clients. So it wasn't really much of a risk for her to move over to do that either. In Dubai, obviously, you have to have a license and be a legitimate entity to operate. So we had that kind of cloud over our head in the early days, and we wanted that kind of legal aspect to be sorted out. And so I guess it was just good timing, and a lot of things kind of fell into place and clicked for that. But I was also extremely naive at the time, looking back. So I did some projections, and you won't believe, you'll laugh at this, but essentially I projected the revenue, but not any of the expenses. And so I projected, like, we'll make $1 million dirhams in the first year, we'll make $1 million in the second year, and we'll make £1 million in the third year. So why not? Let's do it. That's easy. And so it was a bit of a wake-up call, like when the expenses started to come in, and all of my projections went out the window. But after that, I think probably the other thing is, sorry, I'm jumping around, it's because this kind of is just kind of my thought. I haven't really thought about this for a long time. But very shortly after we founded the company, we then made our first hire, which was quite special. It was really, really special for us at the time. But obviously you can't employ somebody or hire somebody without having them on your visa. So that was also a driving force to kind of make this a formal thing. And so, yeah, we had our first employee who was in the dungeon, my parents' house. And if I'm not mistaken, I think we grew to like 5 or 6 of us all squeezed into one tiny room, like a shoebox. And then that's what prompted us to then move out and find our own place, and kind of justified it obviously as a business expense because we could have a larger office for the team. But we quickly grew out of that as well. And then this is probably, I can't remember now, maybe 2 or 3 years in, we then moved into the DMCC, where we had a massive office, which was like way too big for us, but it was beautiful. And we did get a good deal on it, but we definitely moved in with the expectation that we would fill it. And I think it was around 2016, maybe 17, when we peaked, where we had 16 employees, which I still wouldn't say is filling it, but it was good. You had the buzz. It was like people everywhere, and I remember taking a selfie of myself with the team behind me and feeling, yeah, I mean, it was a bit corny or maybe arrogant, but I felt like this is. It's kind of, it was the depiction of what I envisioned in my head, of like having a big team and all of that. And so you're right, actually. I think it was one of the not really money related. It was of course money related, but the big vision that I had when we started to grow was me as a leader with a team, and I felt like that was the kind of the defining moment when we'd done that. But that was when we peaked, and it turned out we'd hired way too fast, and in a bad way. We hired a lot of bad eggs as well, and so we had to downsize, which was not a fun experience.
Going back a bit, I'm going to explore that Genesis piece a bit more with you. This is like your therapy session. Things you haven't thought about, maybe you can think about now. But I guess I'll share my reasons for starting it too, or our reasons. Really, it's a co-owned business. We broke it down into 3 different parts. So one being lifestyle, to be able to do what we want, when we want, how we want it, from wherever we want it, and really derive energy from what we do, positive energy from what we do, which you're not always in full control in when you're an employee. So that was the first part of it. The second was obviously money. Money is important because money feeds our lifestyle, and money also keeps your lifestyle in check. So if you're having these grand visions of what you're, like you have to be good at what you do to make the money that you want to make so that you can have the lifestyle. So that also drives the kind of competitive nature and the work that we do on ourselves. So 2 was money. And then number 3 was start a business as a form of maybe you'll relate to this, but as a form of a creative expression. So we're both pretty experimentative in our lives. We move on from things pretty fast. We don't like to overcommit. We go back on our own words pretty frequently because we don't mind that. We think with new information coming into light, you should be able to change your decision because, as you said, it's only one life, right? You can't overcommit to that. So we try to run experiments every 90 days, proper hypotheses, right? You say you're going to do X, Y, Z, you're going to get ABC out of it, and if you don't, then here's plan B. And these 3 reasons, well, 2 out of the 3 reasons are not to do with money, which kind of makes the question of raising investment from outside pretty null and void, because try telling an investor, hey, I'm running a creative experiment with this business. What do you mean ROI? I'm not sure if we're going to get ROI, right? I'm projecting only the revenues and not the expenses.
Yeah.
But I feel like we can connect a bit on that, and also what kind of pros and cons did you do at the start before you got your first license? What's the pro of getting into business? What's the con of getting into business? Did you have that sort of list mapped out, or if you think about it now, could you articulate what those were for you at the time?
The con of having a business in Dubai is the cost. That's what stopped us in the early days, because we just didn't have the money to set up a company officially. I don't think there's really any other con associated with it. I mean, you can get into the weeds and you talk about HR and that sort of thing, but we weren't really even aware of that sort of thing at the time. I guess one of the cons is the lack of security. When you've got a job, you go to work and you work it and you come home and you have relative security there, and the inability to switch off. So when you've got a business, it's not 9 to 5, it's 24/7, and so we had to make a big effort to have like time where we didn't talk about business, and do other things and find other hobbies, and that was kind of useful also for our relationship. But in a weird way, it was good for our relationship doing the business together as well, because we had so much to talk about as well. I guess pros and cons, definite lifestyle thing. I mean, lifestyle is probably why I didn't get a full-time job, and probably why I ended up where I am and I stayed as freelancing. It's just because without that freedom, I could never have done that traveling that I wanted to do, or choose when I work, and have that kind of control over decisions and that sort of thing. So yeah, definitely lifestyle was probably the biggest motivating factor behind it all. The money was just like, in my naivety, was just sweetening the deal in a way. Like, wow, I can have this lifestyle and I can make that much money. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay. I want to talk about people in your life around the time when you were starting the business. And the reason I'm sticking so long on this genesis of the business part is I'm hoping that the viewers or listeners, there's a certain segment of them that are kind of on the fence, former employees always looking to kind of make the jump, or, we know enough people in our life that always talk about something, that they want to do something on their own or go out on their own, but never actually get to do it. And throughout my conversations on this podcast, it has never been that super planned. Like, we don't sit around and making business plans and get them checked by 5 different mentors and get approval of the whole community before we start. It's alive before you know it. The business is alive before you know it. So which is why, like, hopefully if people are listening and they're wondering what kind of doubts and fears and resistance and consideration that goes around starting something or just going from 0 to 1. One part of that, especially in the culture here in Dubai or people from my community, is the reaction of your family. You've mentioned, the business has kind of run in your family, but were you ever, did anyone try to talk you out of it outside of your own, like you and your wife, from your family and friends, someone questioning you a bit too much, or because you've kind of lived that lifestyle already, people are like, James knows what he's doing. James is being James. Let James be James. Or was there any resistance from the support network that you have?
No, there was no resistance. It was the opposite. So obviously, yeah, maybe it was an element of James will be James, and I think they were proud of me as well, doing that. And so I felt proud of myself doing it too. In fact, it was probably there wasn't enough negative kind of sense checking, because what I soon found was that the idealism of it was not necessarily the reality of it, not just on the financial side, but on the lifestyle side, as I mentioned. Like, when we joke, you create your own business, people think you're wealthy, and you're putting all your money back into the business to make it work. And so the travel did subside in a great way. So the lifestyle went down for a while. When we first started, we had a friend in our friendship group who was running more of a creative agency in Dubai. And so he was kind enough to give us an hour of his time. We met up with him, and he just explained to us everything. It was I wouldn't call it a wake-up call, but we found it extremely valuable. Some heads up, I suppose. But maybe at the time, because he also said it's extremely stressful, but maybe at the time we didn't understand what that meant. Or we just chose to ignore the negatives and just focus on the positives, which I think is an inherent thing for an entrepreneur. You've got to be of that kind of mental attitude in order to take these risks in the first place. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but definitely it was far, far more stressful than either of us could have imagined. And I felt, and I feel that looking back, nobody warned us of that. I don't think it wouldn't have stopped us. But in hindsight, I would have done a few things differently and maybe picked a different business to start. But I just don't think there's enough of that in the startup world. People talk about the good stuff, and they build it up to be this ideological marvel that is only good and is aspirational, and people who do it are amazing, and there are no downsides to it, and it's not the case. And now I have a newfound respect for people who have built successful businesses, and I see them getting hate on Twitter and things like that, and I just realize people don't realize what they've been through to get to that point. It's like that analogy of an iceberg, which success is the top, and then you've got meters upon meters of the iceberg below, which is the hard work that took to get to that bit of success that people see.
Absolutely. I've been, my mind and my language has changed around that quite a bit. Employer bashing is so easy to do for someone who's never tried being an employer. And just from an analogy standpoint, there's crypto community does the same thing with financial institutions, let's say. And I try to get them to realize that financial institutions weren't set up in a day. Like, you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. You don't know how many hundreds of years went into perfecting, and like any system, it's going to be faulty for sure. But there's work that went into it. There was evolution that happened. There was challenges. There was times of deep distress in building that. So you can't just come in and say like, hey, this old way is not working. This new way is going to work better. It's the same way when people look at, have never done business themselves, not saying they're wrong for doing it, it's just they don't have the knowledge of what it takes to have these sleepless nights and, lucid dreaming in some cases, that come along with the package, which is a segue into the next question I was actually going to ask you. For your, let's take it from Grow. What was the biggest test that you think that you've had to face? And I'm talking about a test that almost made you consider leaving it all, burning it to the ground, and starting fresh. And how did you find your way out of that mess? If there's one or two examples that come to mind.
Cash flow management, the biggest cause of stress. The other cause of stress is letting our clients down. Definitely massive cause of stress. And we did that more than I cared to admit in the early days as we were kind of finding our feet and figuring things out. So those are the massive issues. I'm proud to say that we've sorted out the client issues, but the cash flow issues are still an ongoing thing, especially obviously coming through COVID. I don't think that, especially in the first maybe 7 years, Grow was our baby. So I didn't treat it as something disposable. And so there was never ever a consideration that I would give up on it. It was just a matter of how do we get through, how do we survive? One thing that really helped was when we got involved with Joie Brands, which is now our sister agency. I obviously started working very closely with the owner of Joie Brands. And Joie Brands was going through a lot of financial difficulties even before COVID. And I just kind of saw the way that he dealt with it. And so whereas before I thought that if you go into debt and you can't pay off your debts, it's basically a prison sentence in Dubai. Whereas then I saw a company that was in debt, that was struggling to pay off its debts. And I saw how the creditors were reacting to it and how he handled it. And you just take each day as it comes, day by day, and each payment as it comes, and you figure it out and you make your way through. And as long as people see that you are sincere and you're genuinely trying to dig your way out, it's not actually the prison sentence that I was told. Now, don't get me wrong, I have experienced other clients who have ended up having to quickly exit the country because of it could be prison sentence. So it's not like that doesn't exist, but the reality is it's a lot more of a gray area than we are led to believe. And also seeing how he dealt with cash flow problems made me take things a lot less seriously, not in a bad way, but in my head in terms of this is not going to kill me. This is not life and death. Whereas before, an unhappy client or not having enough money in the bank to pay salaries in time you don't realize it at the time, but your body reacts in the same way as if you're literally in the executioner's chair. And that was not healthy. So going through those painful experiences on a monthly basis, basically for many years, and it still rears its ugly head occasionally now, it put things into perspective and made me able to tolerate stress a lot easier than I was able to before. But also, I've obviously learned coping mechanisms and skills around solving cash flow issues and that sort of thing. But now it's more. So after there was a transition. Something snapped where suddenly Grow was not my baby anymore, and I was open to the idea of selling it. And I can't remember when that was or what caused that, and maybe it was a gradual process of working with my business coach, because he's very much of the ethos of creating multiple sources of income and having a business that supports you rather than you having to support the business and supporting your lifestyle and all of that. So maybe it was just a gradual process of realization, or maybe it was actually the point where we had other sources of income. So you mentioned crypto. I kind of gone down that rabbit hole, and that's created an entirely new source of income, where it's now kind of like, should I sell Grow and just focus on crypto because it's making more money? And that thought process changes the way that you see things. And like Grow now is not my baby. It is a business, and we've got Joie brands, and we've got crypto, we've got a few other things boiling, and so I guess I've got more perspective now about it, and so I could very easily, if for the right price, sell it and walk away. But the thing that's kind of holding me back is that with agencies, when you're an integral part of the team, it's very hard to do that in a short amount of time. I was listening to a podcast where they were interviewing a lady called Jodie Cook, who sold her agency and walked away after 2 weeks. So I did some digging and spoke to the guy that helped to do that, and what's the word, facilitated the sale. And I spoke to Jodie as well, and basically figured out what needs to happen. And I've been using that now, actually, in coming up to 10 years, because we had this as our kind of milestone. 10 years, we need to have made it, whatever that is, whatever that looks like. We have to have made it. And I think from a lifestyle perspective, we have, but in terms of a financial perspective, I don't think either of us are satisfied. And so one option, so essentially the mindset now is that now that I've spoken to these people, I know what it takes to have a business that people want to acquire. That's basically our goal for the next 12 months, is to create that. And a lot of things are in play and lined up. And so knowing my ambitious self is probably over ambitious, but why not? Let's do it with this 1 year. But the idea is that if we build the business to that point where it's almost passive income, then we have a choice at the end of that, whether we sell it or not. It doesn't mean we have to. It gives that flexibility, but it also means that we've achieved what we wanted to achieve in terms of having a decent income and a good lifestyle without the stress. That's the goal.
Yeah, we did an exercise, Alina and I, that came to kind of a similar conclusion about a year ago. We haven't had much movement on that. It's still an ideation phase, but we sat down and we said, okay, in 10 years from now, the old interview question, where do you see yourself 5-10 years from now? And we sat outdoors in nice weather, had a coffee, and went quiet into our notebooks with our pens and started just writing down. And luckily the answers matched, and the answers were, to paraphrase, we see ourselves as owners of multiple lines of businesses that we don't even know today that we'd be interested in that. So we're leaving it pretty broad and open and opportunistic. And for me, it's like building a machine, right? That's what I see a business as, maybe naively. I'm still new into this. I'm 2 years into business, and I'm talking to people like you so I can stop being so naive and get some truth. But it's like building a machine. You spend a lot of work and research and equipment in building that damn machine. But once it starts working, I'm only involved in maintenance. So I want to build these machines all around of different characteristics, some small, some big, some wacky, some boring, and have regular interaction with them from a maintenance perspective. Once a year kind of check in, every 6 months kind of check in, sell my business my own consultation package, like, hey, if you're running into trouble, I'll come and fix it because I built it, and this is what you do next. And then kind of go away and let the machine kind of run on its own. And this kind of ties into, I was a finance major, and my first part of my career was built on selling financial services. And you'd obviously read a lot of stuff about Warren Buffett as a part of that. And he's always told everyone to have multiple streams of income, which didn't make sense to me as an employee, right? Like, how do you even do that as an employee? Do you work, your 40, 50 hours a week and then do some Amazon on the side, or, cut people's hair for a living on freelance? Like, what do you do? But I feel like leverage is so much higher as a business owner. Leverage on your time or each hour invested is so much higher. But where we are right now, I guess we're a few years behind you guys, in the sense that we need to fix the cash cow first, which is our agency. For it, we need one thing to be stable financially. It's given us the lifestyle that we want already, so no doubts about that. But once that part is stable, we can then start focusing our efforts and in grabbing opportunities that we see are interesting for us. But I want to ask you about that. So how do you set that how do you set those milestones for like the next thing? So you said something snapped with Grow, and you're like, okay, this is not the only thing I should be doing. There's a bunch of other things, but do you give yourself milestones? Do you say like, okay, once Grow reaches X amount of revenue or X in the bank, or is it a time limit? Or are you still doing what you did back in the day as going with the flow, and figuring it out as it comes? How are you keeping yourself accountable to these
Yeah,
ideas? Yeah.
so I think that's one of the things, like when I said that I would have done things differently, that's what I would have done differently, is set more meaningful milestones and be less emotionally connected to the business. So be more cutthroat and basically say, do what we're doing now in terms of saying, right, we've got this date and we want to earn this much revenue. This is what we've got to do to achieve it, by hook or by crook. And that's it. And essentially, like, almost, now in my mind, I don't know if I've come to this point yet or not, but almost walk away if it doesn't work. Be prepared to do that. Now, the reason I say that is because it's funny, because you mentioned the word cash cow, and that's exactly what Grow has become, is the cash cow. And that's why I haven't ditched Grow to focus on crypto, because Grow is creating the cash that then goes into crypto that then makes more money. And so we still need that source of income, and that's a certain level of stability. But at some point, like you were saying, you look back or you look ahead in 10 years' time. Do we still want to be in the same place we're at now? Absolutely not. And so there needs to be a point where we decide the opportunity cost is greater than, so what I mean is, there are other platforms and companies that I want to build, which are kind of simmering away, and I'm building them, like dedicating 1 day per week, which is it's not enough at all. But essentially, running one business takes up all of your time when you're growing it and getting it to a certain point. And so that means that you are neglecting other opportunities in order to achieve a certain goal for that business. And so that business needs to be generating a high return for your time. And so if we grow to the point where we can exit it, then that's generating a high return for your time. It's worth doing, because then you can use that money to then fund your next project. But if it's still just dragging on and we haven't made the progress that we think we should have done, and you get to the 10-year milestone, and there's got to be a point where you cut stuff. Now, 10 years for us is April, so it's not enough time to have achieved the goals that we had for it, which means we are going to run over. So we've got now that gray area of how long do we run over and how long do we put up with it. But at the same time, we've got this target of 12 months and a clear path to achieving it, and all of the kind of the ducks are in a row. So therefore, I'm just going to throw everything I can at it, because if we do achieve it, then it would be totally worth that year of work. But I guess it's just about a matter of opportunity cost. You've got to think of all of the ideas I want to do, which one is going to be the most scalable and achieve that revenue target in the shortest amount of time, so that then I can move on to the next one. And I was actually speaking to a partner earlier on this week who, he said something really interesting. So I was talking about the prospect of scaling Grow and selling it. And he said that by the time you get to the point where you can sell it, you want to take that money because of the risk, because you basically peaked the business to a certain extent. Of course, someone else could take it and probably 10x it, but to a certain extent, you've peaked the business. And if you keep it as a passive source of income, you've got that inherent risk that it could all go wrong at any moment. And there's no guarantee that it'll continue performing at that level. And so the opportunity cost changes there, where you actually do a lot better to sell it, take the money and remove the risk entirely, and then choose what you want to do with that money. And you could choose to do another agency, for example, if you wanted, and start from the ground up, but do it far better because you've learned what you've learned, or you start another business. And for me, the problem with an agency is that the scale is so constricted. Like you win more business, you have to hire more resources to deliver. So you're just scraping a little bit of cream off the top each time. And so to actually make meaningful margins and meaningful income, you need to be a really, really big agency. And the time it takes to scale to an agency like that size and have that stability, rather than just obviously scaling up and shrinking down really quickly, have a scalable and stable agency, it takes a long time. Whereas if I were to put my time into a digital product, for example, then the ability to scale that is infinite to a certain degree, depending on the size of the market. And the overheads are marginal for every new piece of business that you win. So there will come a point where grow is not the opportunity. The opportunity cost is outweighed by something else. But the idea is that we get to the point where we can sell the business before that happens, because the worst thing would be the sunken cost fallacy, where you don't want to give up on something you've spent 10 years building and just do nothing with it and just let it die. That would be tragic, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're alluding to the curse of the agency, right? Like the fact that it's impossible to scale revenue without scaling expenses almost 1-to-1 for a good phase, and then you run ahead faster a bit, but then it catches up with you 1-to-1 again the more senior people you get. And Lena and I talked about this, right? Like the only way out, as you said, is to build a giant agency, and that doesn't appeal to us at all, right? Like having a swanky office, a big brand name, a bunch of open office plans with 20, 30, 50 people kind of crushing away at their specialized jobs, and we're kind of just chasing business to keep them busy, and client dinners, and all the things you have to do as a big agency to get the big clients are just not appealing. We'd be doing HR most of the time, right? So we started thinking exactly about what you said about getting into products, and we experimented last year by starting our academy. So everything that we knew about advertising, we put them in a couple of courses, and we had some live cohorts going and students coming in. So the proof of concept is done. So this year we wanted to take that to the next level. But the curse of the agency is not just the fact that it's hard to grow, it is unpredictable in terms of maintenance. You lose a few key clients, or you lose a few key employees, and you'd had, as you said, one day out of the week planned out for your experiments. You just don't have that anymore, because you're trying to keep the ship steady. And the milestones that you had for yourself are all getting delayed, which is pushing your escape route further ahead as well. And we're in that phase right now, I guess, along with you guys as well. So it'll be interesting to compare notes in 12 months and see.
Right now, so it's, I can't remember the saying, but essentially I feel like I've taken a step back, because in the early days I read the 4-hour work week. So going back to working so you don't have to work, and delegating everything you possibly can. So that kind of shaped the agency quite a bit. And so up until last year, end of last year, I was relatively free in terms of I was just working on improving the branding, the messaging, our sales proposition, and all of that. I was just kind of doing the creative innovation stuff, and everything else was handled by the team. But then it didn't work out with our sales guy, and so now I've had to get hands-on again with sales, which essentially is a full-time job. And so I am missing that freedom and the spare time and the flexibility to just log off whenever I want. And I'm enjoying it too. It's giving me a greater sense of purpose, because I'm busy, and I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but you're right. It's kind of taking away from the project. Otherwise, I'd have been able to do probably 4 days a week working on this project. And you're right. It's because whether it's because you lose a client, or because you lose a key member of the team, you do find yourself always kind of taking one step forward, or maybe like 1.1 step forward and then one step back. And my business coach says that although it might feel like a step back, it's still a development in a good way. And if you count everything, you're still moving forward, and you're growing and developing in a good way. But it is definitely a very frustrating experience.
Yeah. I want to ask you about working with your wife, because I know we can talk about that for a few minutes, but I want to ask you before that. I just had a question pinned down while you were talking there about next steps and other ventures. Would you ever buy a business? I know you're talking about selling a business, but have you considered that? Have you thought about that? Have there been any candidates? What's your thinking around
Well,
that?
we did with Joie Brands. It was a weird kind of acquisition. It wasn't actually cash transaction. We basically adopted the agency, took on all of their overheads, and kept them running while they cleared the debt. And that's still kind of an ongoing process, but we're very close. So definitely open to acquiring. Now, the reason I did that was because before we actually did that, I was working very closely with them just as a partner. And a lot of the people who need branding obviously then need help in growing their business. So we got a lot of referrals off them. And then likewise, when we start looking at a company in terms of its ability to grow and its health, we often identify that this company needs a new brand because otherwise you're going to embark on growth when it's like swimming upstream basically. If your brand is crap, your target audience is not clicking with your messaging. There's no point in doing the marketing or any kind of growth. You've got to get your branding straight. So you can see obviously there was a strong synergy there, it's a connection between the two, and by acquiring it, what we did was we effectively doubled revenue overnight, and a lot of the overheads were already covered by Grow anyway. So like, the trade license, the office, the team to a certain extent, the materials, the desks, everything. And so it became very like a good opportunity for Joie because in order to get out of its financial situation, it needed to turn things around, and it had a huge overhead kind of hanging over it. And so we were able to remove that entirely. And so then it's just pure revenue, which is pure profit, really, in a way, to a certain extent. And so it was a strategic decision. It worked well. And so, but I guess that was before I thought about selling Grow. Although I did have no, that wasn't before actually, sorry. I was thinking that we could also acquire Joie and basically have a company that's got double the revenue and the same overheads, and therefore the value of that company, if we did want to exit, was going to be substantially more. And it's working to the extent as well where one of those things that I need to do in order to be sellable is to hire a managing director or a CEO. And that in order to do that, Grow on its own wouldn't have the funds to afford a salary like that, but the two companies combined can. So it opens up opportunities in that sense as well. So yes, but in terms of would I do it again? I don't think I would take on debt to do it. But if I see an opportunity like that where you have that level of synergy, then totally I'd be open to hearing about it.
I'd encourage you to check out, if you haven't already, the site called Micro Acquire. They've got these tiny one-man projects, or actually running businesses of solopreneurs, that just don't have time to complete or finish the business up. There's some exciting stuff there to see as well. It just goes back to the thing you said, like you wanna rate your experiments by the likelihood of you being successful in them as well. You can't go after everything that's shiny and fancy and sounding good, and there needs to be a bit more formality around the whole process. And I guess it's a weird segue, but I'll segue into working with your spouse too. So obviously a member of the family, someone you share a room with, there's a certain formality and informality of working with them. How have you guys kind of evolved your working relationship over these years? And I'm asking this for purely selfish reasons. Alina and I have experimented with tinier businesses in the past. We've done a mini clothing business. We tried to get into supplements and pill boxes, and never got anywhere with any of them. One of them broke even, but we've just had that experience or that knack to know that, okay, you and I understand each other intuitively enough, and we are able to spend a lot of time, a waking time, with each other without getting on each other's nerves. And we both of us have our independent lifestyles to go back to, during the course of a week or a month to kind of get away from that. But how have you seen your relationship, business relationship and personal relationship evolve over the course of you working together?
I think the mutual respect has increased. And it's been, I mean, obviously it hasn't been easy at times, and there are certain times when I expected things of Laura that didn't happen, and probably vice versa. And it's been just a learning experience in terms of understanding what our strengths are and focusing ourselves on that. Because then when you do that, when you focus your strengths, you're actually good at something, and you then have positive results, which then reaffirms that respect and support and trust in each other. So I think over time, yes, we just gained in respect and also understanding of each other, what our strengths and weaknesses are. And I think in terms of the way that we manage it, I mean, people kind of come to us surprised that we work together all the time and that sort of thing. And I think it's just a personality thing. We click, and we're best friends, and we can spend time together, and it's easy. But we do have to manage it to a certain degree in terms of making sure that it doesn't just consume our lives and our conversation. So I would say that we're probably only 10% successful at it, but we do have structured times. Like, for example, beginning of this month, we went out. It was great, actually. We got a massage, we went to the sauna, steam room, went for breakfast, and then sat down and properly focused on what we want to achieve. And so we had you could call it a formal meeting. We don't talk to each other formally or anything, but we kept it obviously on topic and figured everything out. And in terms of the opposite, when we go on date nights, we try to talk about other things, like the kids or friends or hobbies or whatever, rather than grow. And inevitably, the conversation flows back, and we're solving problems again. But then it's just a matter of recognizing that and saying, okay, so let's talk about something else.
Yeah, we've tried multiple things like, hey, 9 p.m. cutoff, no business talk after 9 p.m. Or yeah, going when we're out to dinner, no business talk. But it's just because, you know how you were saying you were lucid dreaming about coding because there's such an obsession that was consuming, all consuming at a point. We're at that stage now. I have a better control because I have more experience being an employee versus like yourself or Alina. Even she's been in the freelance game for a lot longer than I have. But for the majority of my career, 10 years of working 9 to 5, which means I know how to shut off at 5, because you can't pay me enough to think about work after 5, even though I was making good money. But I think that has helped me in my business journey, that I am actually able to tune out business thoughts in the evening. I tend not to open the laptop or look, unless I'm super anxious. The anxiety is the only thing that can make me work, but out of joy, or maybe out of extreme joy, I would work, but nothing in between. There's no voice in my head like, hey, you might as well be working on moving your goals forward. Time will tell if that's the right attitude to have or not. I'm not saying that's going to work out really well, but
I think that's healthy too. And it's a good point, actually, because I remember when we first started Grow, we didn't have any boundaries. We were working all the time. But over time, that structure has become something that is just normal for us. So when you first asked me a question, I didn't realize it. But now, yes, we do. We stop work at 5:30 every day. And the thing that is different for me is that if something is bothering me, I will think about it. I can't just not think about it. Like, I find myself, one of the worst things that really kind of grinds is when a client hasn't paid their debts, their bills. And I take it super personally. And so I find myself lying in bed, even waking up in the middle of the night, suddenly just thinking about it, and then can't get back to sleep. So there's a certain, maybe meditation or something would solve that, to help me kind of get through that nonsense. But for the most part, in terms of when we clock on and clock off, it's very structured. We don't work on the weekends. But I think maybe there's a combination of necessity kind of drove it. I mean, you could say I'm kind of copping out there, but in the early days, necessity drove it, where we felt like we had to work all the time. Whereas now we've got a team, and so we don't have to. But then, having said that, I've been thinking about this new project that I'm doing one day a week, and thinking, should I work on it on the weekend? I haven't done it. I've resisted the temptation, but it has kind of gone into my head. But now with kids, I think anything that's going to take my time on the weekend has got to be weighed up against spending time with the kids. And so it's a very hard thing to justify, which helps keep things in balance.
Yeah, just an example of this podcast, right? We talked about this as a fun project to do, but it's a bit more than just fun, right? It's really for me to get access to people like you that think about things very clearly, or have made the mistakes that I can vicariously kind of learn from, just like you had your experience of watching that person in debt and managing their way out of it. And you vicariously kind of pick up stuff. So this is one reason for starting this podcast. The second one being, it's probably a way to build a funnel for our clients, or a funnel for ourselves to get business, if we meet interesting people enough, or people that are outside our network. And the third thing is it's content, right? So content can feed into multiple businesses later on, especially if we do information products and stuff like that. So initially, when we sat and thought about this, it was like, hey, why don't you do it on the weekend? And that's what kind of worked against my lifestyle goals. Like, but the weekend is the weekend. It's supposed to be a deloading phase. Or why don't you work on this in the evenings? But I don't have the best of mental energy in the evening to work on something like this, right? Like, I am fresh during the day. I work best during when the sun is out. That's just a biological thing. So we try to weigh that against it. And here I am, recording in working hours. I will be editing this in working hours. It's just I have to build this into the system without having it take over. Again, this, I feel guilt about it, and I know the guilt is real. And you're probably smiling about that too.
I don't know. I think you should feel pride. I mean, the hardest things, and maybe it's for other companies, but certainly for agencies, is that the hardest thing that we struggle with is working on our businesses and marketing our own businesses. And it's probably the number one thing that you could do that would lead to success. And nobody does it because clients always take precedent. And so the fact that you are doing that in a very structured manner, and you're creating this content that could potentially define your success, you should feel pride. No, there should be zero guilt.
Yeah, because it's guilt because, some of these projects, and this, they won't turn into money for a long time. Some projects you take on, you just know in the deepest down in your heart that someday it will come good, but that day is not near, and there's no point forcing it. You can't force these things to come to fruition really fast. So. Which is a segue.
It's one of those things that that's the problem, is it doesn't have an immediate cash return, but it creates equity, but not cash. And so just reconfigure how you value it.
Yeah, that's a good rephrase. I'm going to use that. It's creating equity. So if Alina finds me in GarageBand during working hours, I'll be like, hey, I'm just creating equity. I want to use this as a segue to my next question, and a thing that I struggle with is what we talked about right now is patience, having that patience, knowing that you've been in business for this long. You're a good person to ask this, knowing that you're not going to see the rewards immediately, or the rewards that you see immediately are just enough to get you by, but the big ones are coming. How do you deal with patience? Do you cultivate it? Are you impatient? How does that feed into your relationships with your colleagues, your staff, your clients? How do you work on your patience, if you do work on your patience at all?
I don't really consciously work on my patience, so maybe I'm a patient person. We did, I don't know if you've heard of it, Strength Finder. With the whole team, we did those exams, and one of the things, not exam, but the test, and one of the things that came through was one of my core strengths or key strengths is future, which basically means that I basically live in the future. My mind is always thinking about the future, which gives me a huge advantage in building a business and building it for the future. But it means I can't really necessarily appreciate the present. And so because I'm living in the future in my head, maybe that's why I'm patient, because it already exists in my head. Everything that I kind of plan for is working. On a very short-term scale, I probably am very impatient and a bit hard on my team when certain things are not done in the way that I want them to be done or fast enough. But then there's this massive chasm between immediately short-term and very, very long-term.
Yeah, it's I admire the fact that you already have a lot of it within you. Do you have?
And maybe one thing that can help in that sense is breaking things down, breaking your BHAG, your big, what's the big hairy audacious goal?
Audacious goals, yeah.
Yeah, break that down into manageable chunks so that you feel like you are achieving things rather than having to wait for that achievement or at the end. Because the other thing is that BHAG probably will never materialize. It'll evolve and warp and become something completely different. And if you haven't celebrated those wins along the way, then you're going to find it kind of dissatisfying.
We have a big problem, both of us, in celebrating wins. Small, big, doesn't matter. We just don't. We just move on to the next thing. Have you guys started implementing anything for yourself consciously, or does that come naturally to you?
We were better at it in the early days than we are now. And I don't mean like literally going out for champagne every time you win a client or anything. We used to, but now, no, we do not. And it's something that we need to work on, to be honest. But I mean, in terms of literally even just ticking something off on your list or on your to-do list gives you that, is it dopamine or some kind of chemical release that makes you feel good, and satiates that impatience to feel like you're making progress, rather than that, as I said before, like that chasm where you're here and you want to be there and you can't reach it and you have no idea how you're going to reach it. That's not a good feeling. Whereas if you have in your head this psychological bridge that you're building towards it, then you can just take one step after another to get to it. And then just recognizing when you've achieved that micro task. That's the key.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, it's still work in progress. Like what you're saying makes sense, but in practice, been very terrible at it. But everything that you're saying is already creating neurons in my brain to connect there. I want to take a quick time out and ask you. I've got about 20 more minutes of questions left. Is that still okay?
Just 1 second. Let me have a look. I just got to double check what Laura said.
Yeah, I'm just gonna grab my charger in the meantime too.
Yeah, I'm good until for the next 30 minutes, so we should be good.
Okay, cool. I'll talk about the big one right now, depending on how much you want to get into it. But from an agency standpoint, or maybe just even a general business standpoint, how do you view, how does James view team building, and what has informed your current philosophy on team building? Were there key moments that kind of shaped or defined how you think about team in general? You mentioned earlier that you see yourself as a leader, and how does that play into your current business right now? And what are the things you can extrapolate from not just my agency, but things that you think are true for just building a business in general when it comes to team building?
We've obviously been having a physical office for a long time. We've done it all in a way, like we've tried everything. We've taken the team on trips to the Musson Dam and swimming with the dolphins, and even just small picnics in the park. We've had people come over to do workshops on various things like women empowerment and leadership and teamwork, culture shops, as I said, the Strength Finder. So we've done a lot of things. But to be honest with you, those are kind of short-lived. And I might be wrong. Obviously, I can't see what happens behind the scenes, but they make it a fun place to work. But I don't know how long they have how they have a lasting effect on the team, or whether they do. What I have found to be the number one way to be a good leader and create solid teams and that trust is authenticity. And it kind of goes back to what you're saying about how people hate employers. And I think part of the problem is that because they don't understand what's going on in the mind of the employer, and the employer, and I was guilty of this in the early days as well, the employer hides that in order to so-called protect the team. And so I read a few years back, I read The Great Game of Business. Can't remember the name of the author, but a really good book on basically full transparency, where you teach the team on how to read a balance sheet and understand the numbers and what is involved with running a successful, profitable business. Even the basics of knowing that earning a profit is a good thing, and it's not like the immediate reflexes. If they're making a profit, why aren't they paying me more money? Just the basic stuff like that. But it went further, especially with COVID. We instilled. So we had a really good company culture in person, and I wanted to make sure that was maintained. And so we started what we call the weekly whiffle, which stands for What I Feel Like Expressing, which is basically 1 hour where everyone jumps on Zoom and we don't talk about work. We talk about whatever is on our mind and how we're doing. And then I started asking the team to rate their mental health on a scale of 1 to 10. And that's a really good clue. Obviously people exaggerate it. So when they're like 6 out of 10, for example, that there's something wrong. So you can dig it a little bit. You don't want to obviously make them uncomfortable, but you can dig a little bit deeper to see if there's something that they can talk about and make them feel better. And that's really helped. But also, obviously, I rate myself on a scale of 1 to 10. And so when I was going through depression, essentially, for several years, I didn't really admit it to the team for a long time. But when the scale of 1 to 10 came in, it was hard to kind of hide that away. And I decided just to explain it and tell them. And just the team, just when you are that vulnerable to them, you become that like the human to them. And so they just open up to you. And there was, if it was physical, there'd have been a lot of hugging and support and that kind of thing. But they very quickly realized that you are just as insecure and human as they are, and you've got your own problems, and you're also carrying the weight on your shoulders of everybody's job security and all of the problems that come with a company. And when you share that with the team, not only do they understand, but they trust you completely. And then they start to come to you for their own issues and advice and support in all kinds of different ways. And so definitely that's the number one secret, I would say, is just pour your heart out to your team, because that moment of vulnerability creates a huge bond.
I wish I'd talked to you much earlier about this. So when I was 27, I got my first managerial job, and it's the first time in my life that I was responsible for the well-being, because that's what you are as a leader. You're responsible for the well-being of multiple people. And some of these guys were, 40, 45 years old. There were women on the team. There's 1 or 2 people younger than I was, and there was a good group of 10 people. And as a new manager in charge of the P&L of the branch that I was running, I had massive depression and anxiety, imposter syndrome. Am I good enough for this? Did they make a mistake hiring me? Did I make a mistake, taking that step in the ladder? And my initial reaction was to be invisible physically too. So I'd stop coming in to all the days. I'd take more remote days myself. But the fact of the matter is that the team gets to see you, and people have strong bullshit filters, so they can tell when something is off with somebody. The fact that you don't articulate it makes it worse, but they all of them felt, and I luckily had a very good relationship with all my staff that they would take me out for a coffee and be like, hey, I know something's on your mind. What's up? You can talk to me. And I was getting therapy from my employees, which is, it's supposed to be the opposite, right? Because, I do it for them. I was, as a manager, you're more of a therapist than an actual leader sometimes, right? You're just walking people through their own troubles and anxieties and insecurities and hiding the fact that you have your own to a point where it's impossible to hide your own. And then it kind of reciprocates. And all the goodwill that you build up by doing it for them kind of works out. Right now, we're in the phase where I'm not that, I'm the back end guy, I'm the operations guy, so I don't have much interaction with the team or the service that they deliver, and I'm looking after the architecture of the business. But this year, one of the goals is to be a bit more, as you said, vulnerable, a bit more present, a bit more connected. We're on a phase with our kids. We call them our kids. Like Alina and I don't have children yet, but we call our juniors our kids, and we refer to them as kids. And they're at the level where they can troll us without any fear of retribution, because that's the kind of culture we have. We're all just a bunch of buddies working together, and they make fun of me like a lot, which I love. I love it. I love being trolled because it shows a sign of comfort that they have with me, I guess. But at the same time, you have to learn to strike fear when it gets too far, when it affects performance. I don't care about it getting too far. I have a strong soul when it comes to taking on crap from people. That's not a big problem. I'm strong for that, but it's performance and how you bring people back into that place, and that is something that I've kind of worked on and still developing. I'm just curious, the Great Game of Business, was that recommended by Murtaza to you?
Probably.
Yeah, he's
I don't know
hawking that
where
book
I
to
heard
me
it
for a
from, but
while.
he's a great source of book recommendations and wisdom in general.
He was on this podcast earlier too, and he's been hawking a ton of books to me. I still have to get to them. Okay, I wanted to also ask you. You mentioned just working through your own anxieties and depression, and not sharing and sharing, but how much of that, or this is tough for me to articulate because so the way it works for me is I have both mindsets. I have pulled myself out before, multiple times throughout the course of my life, to a point where I felt invincible. So I felt the highs, or the opposite of whatever depression is, and I felt the down part as well. It's just remembering that you have felt highs before and you can get out of it. Are there any tricks, tools, tips that you kind of utilize to remind yourself that it's not all dark and gloomy, even though your chemicals in your brain might be telling you so? Especially now that you're responsible for the revenue of not just your family, but your employees and partners and everything else. Is there something that you're doing intentionally to stop the demons from coming, or waiting them off?
So I'm kind of happy to say that I wouldn't say I'm depressed anymore. I'm kind of out of that. I'm just kind of on the day-to-day managing the anxiety and stress. When it got, so I went probably through your typical male experience of being in denial that I'm not depressed. Then I eventually recognized it, went to the doctor, and then said, you know what, don't give me the antidepressants. I'll give it another year. I can get myself out of it. And then a year later, it was worse. So I went on antidepressants. I think I was on antidepressants for 3 years, and they worked. Thankfully, they really worked. And when I was on like the high dose, I felt invincible, to the point where I don't think I've felt that way since being a child. So it kind of removed all of the burdens, and I was embracing everything, and it was amazing, really. but I wanted to come off the antidepressants. They've got side effects that I didn't like, and I wanted to be able to kind of manage it. And the whole point of the antidepressants was to be like a crutch to kind of find my mind again, and find a way to kind of manage my stress levels. I think, let's be honest, the reason I fell into depression in the first place was the sheer stress of running the business. So don't be under any illusion there. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. But eventually I started reducing the dosage and just getting back to it. I haven't really found much success in terms of meditation, but maybe because I just don't have the self-discipline to do it enough, but so that it actually becomes like it works. I did do journaling at one point, which again, I haven't had the self-discipline to maintain it, but the stuff that I journaled is no longer bothering me. So that might be a clue. So, just writing all of that shit down and just getting it out of your head really, for whatever reason, really, really works. And I think also just seeing the journey of a fellow businessman with Joie, and seeing that it's not actually the end of the world every time something bad happens. That definitely helps to kind of, is the word quantify the stress, or keep it in good measure and not go out of control. I don't have a secret pill, or, well, I antidepressants is a secret pill, but I don't have like the one thing that would do it. But I think it's a combination of things, and it's also a certain degree of maturity. Like they say, people in their 40s and beyond are much happier than people in their 20s and 30s. And I think you've just got to, in a way, it's a rite of passage. You just got to go through life and get to that point. I mean, I can't speak for people who are like suicidal. I've never been to that point. You know me, I love life. And even when I was super depressed, I still wanted to live forever. I just wanted to solve my depression. But I did get some long period of time with very dark days. And unfortunately, there isn't really a quick win.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean, because all the typical advice that you hear, such as meditation, journaling, I think anyone who feels the compulsion to do it, everyone does it. And maybe you're right. It's just a bunch of things that need to happen consistently, maybe, that potentially helps you. It doesn't matter the combination, or you need to meditate 60 minutes a day for 60 days in a row to feel the effects. No, it's different for everyone, and it's just an ongoing journey. And knowing the fact that if you don't take, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I also find that when it's really bad, I do it because I'm motivated to do it, and then things start to improve, and so I don't do it anymore. And so but I think for a really good kind of mindset, you really do need to be disciplined with it and do it even when you're feeling good. But I haven't got to that point. Other things take priority once you're feeling a bit better.
I'm going to segue a sharp left turn from here. So similar to taking care of yourself, learning and improving and growing yourself is also one of those things, right? Sometimes you are learning because you are in a mess and you need to learn your way out of it, or learn something new to get out of it, versus you're learning before things go wrong, and you're just constantly improving your own knowledge about yourself, the business, through books, videos, mentors, and courses. How do you look at learning? Is that a regular part of your life? What tools are you using? Books? I know you mentioned you had a coach as well, but what's your biggest source of learning on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, I'm pretty crap at reading. I wish I could read more. I don't, for whatever reason, I just don't read the books. So the books that I do quote are one of the few that I read, but they have a massive impact on my life, I suppose, when I actually apply them. So I really should do more. The way that I get my knowledge is, yes, definitely very much through my coach, and Flipboard. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's an app on the phone that you can basically curate the news that you see. And so you put in the keywords if you want to learn about marketing, for example, you just put those keywords in, and then it gives you, you just keep flipping through, and then you see an article that you like and you read it. YouTube is also another a good source of information. And I guess also the agency collective, yeah, that's probably one of the biggest one when it comes to specifically to the agency. So in terms of like for other listeners, it'd be more just in terms of industry network groups, where you have this, you come together and you have this mantra of stronger together. So even competitors will come and share advice and help each other out because we're all going through the same thing. And that's been really, really powerful. There's the Agency Collective in the UK, and there's also Jason Swank in the US, who's got a Facebook group where agency, you just ask any question, and tons of agency owners will come forward and help you out and give you advice. The Agency Collective also does regular events and webinars where they interview other agency owners and bring in experts from outside. So that's been a really powerful. They've got a Slack channel as well, but yeah, it's a really good way of learning specifics to, you know, like standard operating procedures and how to price your services, all that stuff.
Yeah, we're actually in talks right now. I don't know if you've heard of Grow Your Agency. It's another one of these mastermind groups. They're really impressive, and the fact what's helping us kind of move closer towards them is they've just set up in Dubai as their main hub, and they're going to do their outreach from here. So, but they started in the UK and been around places, but now the fact that they actually have like an event tomorrow that we're going to as a teaser for us, like, you know, is this the right thing for us? But, you know, Alina and I both have some sort of, I would call these accountability groups as well, which are, as you said, like it's your competitors. So it's kind of motivating to see what they're doing and the level they're doing it at. We just haven't had one that we are both a part of and can, you know, really, it also depends on the phase that we're in. The masterminds or the collectives that we were a part of were good for 0 to 1. So going from nothing to 1, and now we're at the 1 to 10 phase, and these guys are coming into mind. But I'll chat to you offline about the agency collective.
I think it's yeah, sure. It's also worth noting, like, I think it's quite good to mix it up. And a lot of these networks are free. I don't know if, at least they're pitching themselves as free to me. Maybe they charge you later on, but to mix it up. So I've got the exposure to agencies that are similar size to mine, but then also my business coach, Mataza, would organize kind of like, events, I suppose, where he would interview a certain business owner. And he brought in multimillionaires, a billionaire at one point, who would come into this small group of 20, 30 people, and we'd be able to ask any questions we wanted. That was, and of course, this was around a structured day where he would be planning for the 90 days ahead, but also workshops on certain things where you can learn. But the reason I explain that is because I think it's worth mixing it up and having access to all kinds of different networking or learning networks, because it's like you said, if you're in one where, let's say you're with agencies that are smaller than you, the amount that you can learn is very much limited, and you become the person that's teaching them. Where if you go to a network that's got agencies that are 1 million plus, then you're going to learn an awful lot from those types of people. So keeping it, like going to industry specific ones as well as industry agnostic ones, because really businesses are all geared the same way. And so if you can successfully create and launch one business, you can probably do it for other kinds of industries. And so you can learn a lot from those people. And just even like to the point of seeing how a billionaire thinks about money is so different to even how a millionaire thinks about money. And so just understanding different mindsets and views on the world.
No, I totally agree. As a mostly introvert guy, I'd say, like on the scale of introversion to extroversion, I tip towards introversion. I'm not completely introverted, but that coupled with the fact that growing up with my family, I didn't have access to millionaires, billionaires, business people, hustlers, basically. So enough about business. I want to wrap up with your plans for the future. You've just been hopping around, and your latest destination is Sri Lanka. Where is James going from here? What are your where do you see yourself going from here, just personally as well with your family and your kids? What's on the roadmap, the non-business roadmap for you as a family unit?
Yeah, well, I think Sri Lanka is probably the depiction of at least some of the good stuff that's come out of Grow in terms of our lifestyle and our ability to travel the world and live in places like this. We're looking at spending another year here, which will have been just shy of 2 years in total. And then the next place is Thailand.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's driven by a desire. Our long-term plan is to have property around the world. At least like 4 properties, so that one property for each season, so we can jump around and get the best of both, best of all worlds. The idea of taking it further is so when we first started this travel, we were living out of 5 or 3 large suitcases and 2 small ones. Me, my wife, and my 3 kids, and so we were super light. But it gets a bit hard. 3 months in each country, it was kind of exhausting after a while. And when we landed in Sri Lanka, we found a really good balance of work-life balance, and cost of living is very low. So quality of life is great and cost of living is very low. And so we kind of decided to settle a little bit longer. We found a good base of friends and adopted a kind of a network of support. And so I think it made us comfortable, which I'm not happy about because I didn't want to necessarily get comfortable yet. But what it's kind of done is made us realize that maybe 3 months at a time was a bit ambitious. Maybe 1 year at a time is a bit better. So yeah, we'll see. I think 1 more year in Sri Lanka, we'll get a good feel for the country. We'll be ready for the next adventure. And then Thailand, I think, is just makes the most sense in terms of there's a few negatives with Sri Lanka, and I think Thailand solves a few of those problems. Like, we're living in the middle of the jungle with no access to like the basics. And so, moving to Thailand where you have shopping malls is a luxury considering Sri Lanka. So things like that, I think will be better. Apparently they've got good schools, still very low cost of living, great climate, great environment, good community. So yeah, it's a learning experience, and it's an adventure to see what the future holds, where we want to live, basically.
Well, I'm definitely going to be following this journey. This is not anywhere close to the last time we talk. I want to thank you so much. I know it's been hard to summarize your business life in just this hour and 40-ish minutes, and I know that there's a ton more context that you can add. So maybe that's round 2 for us. You were as clear as possible. I think there's so many takeaways for myself. I've got tons of notes. And hopefully the
Great.
people who are listening have tons of notes in there as well. So I want to thank you so much. If you're back in Dubai, we should do a round 2 in person.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah.
Let's book it in.
All right, thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed that conversation. Please do share this episode with someone you think will enjoy it as much as you did. To find out who else will be coming on, or to recommend someone I should talk to, please follow my Instagram. It's at My First Business Podcast, or go to the website myfirstbusinesspodcast.com. And that's all, folks.